All of the tunnels are underground, where none of the children will ever be found. They wandered away to join the show and lost their way in the world below. They joined the circus and left their town. Now they live here down with the clown.
Beware, spoiler phobes! You have stumbled into A Storm of Spoilers, a podcast covering the adaptation of Stephen King's It, that is Welcome to Derry on HBO. This podcast is split into two sections. In the first section, we call The Calm, we will only cover a single piece of It media. This week, the fourth episode of Welcome to Derry on HBO, titled The Great Swirling Apparatus of Our Planet's Function. And will not spoil anything we know about future episodes of Welcome to Derry, though we might have some speculation questions posed during these first four episodes. In the second Storm section, Neil and I will break down what we expect from It, Welcome to Derry for the back half of this season and discuss some crazy theories about some of these characters in 1964. We're not spoiling, we're enriching. Why, hello again. It is me, Dave Gonzalez, and I've read the book by Stephen King.
And I'm Neil Miller, and I have not read that very long book by Stephen King, nor will I be looking out my window with a telescope in the middle of the night anytime in the near future. Welcome back to A Storm of Spoilers. I have some housekeeping for us, Dave, before we get into this episode. Our upcoming schedule, of course, we will be back in your feeds again next week with Welcome to Derry episode 5, titled Neibolt Street. More on that later. And of course, our Derry era will take us through mid-December, which we're very excited about. This has been a really interesting show to cover, as we'll be discussing. Then we got some end of the year fun that we're going to do, and then we're going to pick up with A Night of the Seven Kingdoms in January. So if you have friends who are not watching the clown show but are Game of Thrones people, let them know to stay subscribed to this feed and come on back to us in January. You can also catch us on YouTube, youtube.com/@DaveandNeil, Da7e and Neil, for video versions of this podcast that you are currently listening to. You may also be currently watching it on YouTube. Either way, we appreciate it. You can, if you'd like more from Dave and I, join us at patreon.com/DaveandNeil, spelled the same way, to get bonus content from all of the past things that we have covered on this feed and so much more, including our weekly adventure pod, in which Dave and I are covering this month movies that are 90 minutes of fun to save us some time during the busy November season. This week we dived into But I'm a Cheerleader, the 1999 film starring Natasha Lyonne, Melanie Lynskey, and Clea Duvall, which is absolute delight. So I would highly recommend it. And if you are signed up at the highest tier of our Patreon, you also get access to a podcast Dave and I are doing where we are rewatching Hannibal, which is somehow relevant again this week to Welcome to Derry, because I have learned a little bit too much about how the hormones animals experience changes the way their meat taste from both this show and Hannibal. So if you would like to experience that synergy along with me, join us on Patreon. How can you get in touch with this particular podcast? You can always email us, stormofspoilers@gmail.com. Someone did this week. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. You can, of course, review us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Leave us 5-star ratings. Say whatever you want. I don't have any reviews from Apple Podcasts this week, but we got a lovely comment from a listener on Spotify named Harper, who said, "Just wanted to say that I found you guys through Trial by Content, then went back and did an entire rewatch of Lost along with your pod, and so deeply appreciate the way you break down and celebrate films and TV. It has been such a treat hearing your perspectives on this show. I look forward to the pods almost as much as the episodes themselves." Thank you so much, Harper. That is the goal with these podcasts. Yeah. So there you have it. That's how you can get in touch with us. Let's kick things off here in the column, Dave, with a more general email, not necessarily about Welcome to Derry, but about Stephen King things. which we've been talking quite a bit about over the last couple of weeks. This email from Jonathan, who says, I'm just wondering why King stories continue to be adapted on a regular basis, despite the mixed success they find. King is not a for sure hit, but it feels like year after year, there's always a studio willing to make one. I mean, right now we have Welcome to Derry, a Running Man reboot, and the recently released Long Walk, none of which seem poised to be smash hits. Jonathan also, I guess, didn't even mention the fact that we got the Life of Chuck, and what was the other one that we got?
The Monkey?
The Monkey. So, Dave, this is actually a really good question for you, who on this past week's Adventure Pod wrapped up the year in Stephen King with a very good ranking. Why do you think they keep making Stephen King things even when they don't always hit? Is it just that he's like really easy to get to sign a contract, or?
He actually did have a program he would call his Dollar Babies, where he would license out his stories to aspiring filmmakers or student filmmakers for $1, which was actually how we got the first Frank Darabont adaptation of Stephen King, which was The Woman in the Room, and eventually led to, Darabont directing other Stephen King adaptations that were incredibly popular, being like, The Mist, Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile. Those were, nominated for Academy Awards. So occasionally King can be successful, but part of like that Dollar Baby program was he's very prolific and is not super precious about adaptations of his films, despite what you might have heard about The Shining. So it's a creator who has a lot of stories, who has like a proven name that you could maybe drum up some interest for your like film just by being the nature of a Stephen King film. That's how, at least initially, how it was. Because like The Green Mile was like 1999, so you get occasional Stephen King adaptations. He tried to direct his own adaptation in Maximum Overdrive, and it didn't work out for him. But I think the current resurgence is because of the success of 2017's It. It's like was for a period of time, if not still, the most successful R-rated film ever. It holds like a whole bunch of horror film accolades. So I think that success, we're still seeing that sort of echo of Stephen King being a viable property. But together with that, and the Mike Flanagan resurgence of him being able to bring Stephen King adaptations back into vogue. So now we're getting a whole bunch of mainstream adaptations, but this sort of tradition of adapting Stephen King was because the stories were kind of cheap. And in like famously, the stories were cheap and you didn't even have to use them. Like The Lawnmower Man is technically based off Stephen King, but he had, got his name removed from it because it deviated so far from the story. So sometimes it's just the first rung is I'm going to adapt a Stephen King story. And if you get all the way to completed film from that, so be it.
Yeah. I think that was always my assumption as well, is that he seems to be a creator who the rights are easy to get. He's not super like controlling over it, right? He doesn't do the George R.R. Martin thing where he talks shit about the thing that's airing currently. Right. Or at least I guess he got that out of his system in like the 80s. And also you have several, I think, very talented filmmakers, Mike Flanagan included, who maybe just grew up on his books and are like deeply obsessed with some of his work, who have kind of carried that torch forward and forced some of that back into the mainstream. So
we're also overlooking the success of Stranger Things, I'm just realizing, which is
that's true.
Very heavily Stephen King influenced to begin with, and is basically a take on it if you blur your eyes enough. So that being popular and also probably contributed to this groundswell of Stephen King influenced media.
Yep. So there you go. Hollywood, they're never going to be able to quit Stephen King. At least not while he's alive.
Never, ever. Let's talk a little bit about the great swirling apparatus of our planet's function. Overall, Neil, it seems like white people keep screwing up with it. I appreciate this episode's take on its interactions with Derry and Derry's sort of racial politics on the police level. I think it is nodding towards maybe being nuanced in the future. So I'm willing to give it some leeway to, give it a little bit of slack to see if I could reel it in to do some sort of fly fishing metaphor that I'm forcing. But we not only get to deal with, I think, obviously the racial implications of everything on the non-supernatural side, but the background of it is very much an indigenous story, at least right now. How did you feel about this episode overall?
I liked it. I mean, I'm a big fan of lore, and I do think that this may be one of the most 2025 things about this show is that it's no longer interested in, the modern day plight of, a group of mostly white kids fighting against the clown. It is dealing with the racial politics of the 1960s and the horrors of like colonialism. And I think that that's kind of cool because that stuff is in the original story, right? Like the ritual of Chud, which I'm sure we're going to talk about pretty extensively over the course of the back half of this season, is something that the indigenous people of the area were very involved with. So it's like that's part of the story that I was always kind of curious about, which is like, what do they know, and how long have they known it, and what is it that sort of created this 27-year cycle, and how did they, if this thing has been here for millions of years, which we know because we've seen the movies, how did the indigenous people of this land, the first people that lived in this place, coexist with this evil for so long before colonization happened, right? And then it seems that within the last 400 years, it has turned into this thing where it just it comes back in these 27-year cycles. And so now we're starting to see where colonialism may have influenced giving it some power and giving it some additional, I guess, creating a little, livestock feeding ground for the evil entity. Because otherwise, right? I mean, let's say that colonizers never really showed up, or they listened to the indigenous people when they showed up and they just never went in the Western woods. They probably could have contained this thing forever in those woods.
Yeah,
right?
Just let it eat deer or whatever.
Yeah, they could have eventually just put up a big fence and no one went in there and it wouldn't have bothered anyone. But that would make a very boring story. So we needed some sort of antagonist to come in and break open the seal, if it were, to release this evil upon the town. And now my big question is, what, like, it's funny because, like, as they were telling that story in the episode, and it pulled back that shot to show like the wide shot of the woods, I kind of half expected them to do like a time lapse shot to show Derry forming like above it,
right in here.
Because now I'm like, I want to know the logistics of like exactly where Derry is compared to where those Western woods were previously. And maybe that's something that next week's episode will answer for us, especially if we're to believe that the pillars are underneath the sewers. So it's like, I don't know, man. It's at a certain point, maybe they told somebody, hey, don't build the town right here. This is a bad idea. And in true colonizer form, they did not listen.
Correct. I think it's very possible that we might see that if we do get more seasons of Welcome to Derry. This idea of establishing a town right there is probably a bad idea. And good news on that front, to step outside of the episode for a second. HBO released that Welcome to Derry is among its in the top 3 of its most watched shows, like premieres, I think, it's with streaming and including watching, which would include, they said included The Last of Us and House of the Dragon.
Okay.
But what HBO didn't include was which one of those is in first place and how many hours of streaming that represents.
Yeah.
So what
I would assume
is,
House of the Dragon is number 1.
I would also assume.
Yeah.
And also if it's in like, we're in the top 3 and you're not telling me which one's 1, 2, and 3, my guess is this is number 3, but you know, who knows?
But even that is kind of a surprise because as we were just talking about with Jonathan's email, I did not go into this expecting that this was going to be like a huge hit show. Right. Mostly because the Stephen King stuff, even though it has broken into the mainstream and has found some success, sometimes it does feel kind of niche still. But you're right to point out that both of those hit movies made a shitload of money at the box office. So people are now invested in this, at least this corner of that cinematic universe.
Yeah. And HBO, by just releasing that, means that it seems excited about how Welcome to Derry is performing. So
sure. Which
first 2 seasons looking good, but you know, company's up for sale.
Well, yeah. And in context, that is a very good sign that we are seeing news that HBO is very proud of how it's performing, because look at how Warner Brothers has treated most of its movies all year, despite their success, where you get these stories on opening weekend in Variety where it's like Sinners is $100 million behind what it needs to make at the box office. Audiences just aren't showing up, even though Sinners is like the best grossing domestic movie of the year. So they're not in like panic mode like they are normally. So that's a really good sign for
they
Warner
must
Brothers
be
Discovery.
enjoying what's happening. So possibly some future things, but I also think that's important as we hit this mid-season point to recognize that, you know, we might not get all of the answers to our questions this season, and especially if they plan on doing additional seasons. Mm-hmm. So one thing that we hadn't talked about up until now was the writers' strike and the production strike, the dual strikes, hit at while Welcome to Derry was in production. And my understanding from behind the scenes interviews was after they'd shot most of episode 3 and hadn't shot episode 4 yet. So this represents at least the time skip where they came back to production. Also, my understanding is like during that time skip was when, because of the production movement, Bill Skarsgård got a little bit more distance from playing Nosferatu and was willing to come back as Pennywise. So part of the series might have been designed to not necessarily focus on Pennywise the clown form, because they were preparing for a season that wouldn't have Bill Skarsgård at all. But this episode represents the first one in production where I think they knew they had Skarsgård coming. Sure. So I don't know if that helps us.
Red balloons all over the place.
Which is why there are red balloons all over the place. But if that helps interpret anything, how do you feel about this as like a mid-season placement? Can you judge using your forward-gazing TV watcher brain what arcs are this season's arcs?
Well, I mean, I definitely think I'm sticking to my theory that this military arc might be a this season arc, might even be only this half of the season arc. Because, we'll talk about the mid-season trailer when we get into the storm, but notably, it doesn't seem to be a whole lot of footage from next week's episode in there, as far as I can tell. And we did see quite a bit of that in the initial trailers for the show. So I remain interested in what's going to happen to the military when they go down into the sewer. And I think that's going to go very poorly for them. And I know that we are expecting that especially now that we've established the black spot, which I'm also wondering about its geographic location related to where the Western Woods were. And we know that from the, the original book story that something bad happens there. But I think that it is possible that this military operation could go very horribly here, right in the mid-season. And I think that that'll kind of set off whatever the back half of this season's arc is. So I do think it's I'm very curious to see, because, you know, as we talked about last week, Andy Muschietti has sort of hinted that they want to spend time in the different eras in different seasons. So I'm wondering if this first season is going to try and wrap up 1962 completely, or mostly completely, in this one season. And I think that's possible, right? Like, you know, the kid's story is moving along. We have the Hank Grogan subplot that we'll have to deal with. I think that it is very likely and still from a time standpoint possible that the military could be not only defeated by Pennywise, but in such a way that they will not want to come back and try this shit again in the 1980s. So I think that they were probably going to deal with the whole cycle in this season, it feels like, because as James Remar's character points out this week, the cycle may already be mostly over. Yeah.
And I love that he brings it up once again that the military is very aware of the cycle.
Yeah, he knows a lot more than he's letting on.
Yeah, I want to go over what we learn about the origins of the Galoo in Daniel's vision, specifically because I want to make sure you got the same things out of it I got out of it. Mm-hmm. One of the things was there was no mention of a cycle in any of this.
Right.
It seems like it just lives in the Western woods, and until it lives in the Western woods, you know, as long as it's confined in the Western woods, it won't like take over the world or whatever. But here's what I gathered. Millions of years ago, it was trapped in a star that fell to Earth. The wise men of the tribe, I want to call them the Shakapiwa because that's what they're called in It Chapter 2, but there's some thing we have to talk about in the storm that makes me think about maybe the Shakapiwa were the ones that just never entered Derry to begin with. So the fact that Daniel and Rose are in here maybe means they're of a different distinction. We'll talk about it anyway, but I'm going to refer to them as the tribe or the indigenous people going forward, because I'm not sure Shakapiwa is adequate or accurate.
Sure, especially because most of what we learned about the Shakapiwa was from like Richie in It Chapter 2.
Yeah. So the wise men of the tribe cut a dagger out of the falling star, or dragon glass, as you and I will be referring to it, because I kept just being like, yes, the dragon glass of the plot. And the tribes sort of lived together with the Galoo, letting it hunt in the Western woods, seemingly hunting not people, which I think is interesting. Because then the settlers came in, they hunted in the woods, and then therefore got hunted by the Galoo, which allowed it to sort of grow in power.
Sure.
So it sounds like it discovered people, it discovered fear, and it was like, oh, I like this food better than the wildlife that I've been feeding on previously.
Yeah. And it was almost like by forcing it into isolation and forcing it to feed on wildlife only, they were keeping it weak.
Yes,
and then
that does make sense.
And then when the settlers came along and it got the taste of human flesh, it was like, oh, this is different.
So the war chief, Sesqui, gets a whole bunch of people together, I believe because Nakani, her daughter, goes to get more shards to begin with, and then Sesqui sends a tribe in after her, is how I remember it.
Yeah.
Because we have to set up that the kids are always the forerunner of the battle against it.
Yeah, the original Losers Club.
Yeah. I hope we get to learn more about them, or certainly how they divine some of these rituals, because Sesqui and her war tribe, things do not work out well for them. They happen across it in its moose form. Moose it is not a it I was expecting, but fun to see. Then it appears sort of as like zombie settlers, and then finally is a priest that grows its limbs and eventually exposes a baby Christ, a stabbing baby Christ.
Yeah. Or essentially, what I called him in my notes, the Total Recall Kuatu colonizer demon baby.
Yep.
Because that is what it reminded me of. If you've ever seen the 1990 Total Recall with the Kuatu guy, the baby growing out of the man's chest.
Yeah. It definitely has a crown of thorns on, so it was definitely like baby Jesus. Paired with last week's episode, sort of nod, the CGI shot of the actual sculpture of Jesus sort of turning evil. And then once again, in a place where you weren't expecting baby horror, the Muschietis are like, what if a baby crawls out of his chest?
Exactly.
So,
well, and I also really enjoy is a strong word. I find it fascinating, and I think it's interesting the way they conceptualize the fears of the indigenous people and how and how they show the quick evolution of that, right? Like it begins as just a very large animal, right? Which would have been the only thing they would have had to fear other than each other prior to colonialization. And then the next evolution is the sort of like first wave of colonizers who brought disease, right? The zombified ones look to me like they've got the pox, and that's pretty rough. But then the final boss is the guy trying to bring religion, and he's the scary Christian priest who is thinks that they are savages and wants to send them on their way to the afterlife. And the Puritans, I guess, would be the best.
I mean, if you think about Christianity being pitched poorly, it is about a zombie messiah. If you're pitching it to somebody who has no concept of, that Christ's resurrection is different than zombies. Yeah. So I do kind of like, I mean, when it was happening, this was an episode that my partner Java sat down. She's slowly being lured in by Welcome to Derry, because I think she was worried that, like some other shows we watched, this one would be slightly more ham-handed or ham-fisted with the racial stuff. But this one, at least when that like priest showed up, she's like, of course it would be the Christian priest. And I was like, okay, this is working. So yeah, I love the fear outline. I continue to think that this show, we'll see what happens when Pennywise actually shows up, but I'm having a great time with it not being a clown at this point. And I hope you are too, Neil. Yeah, well, I mean, definitely. Less clown, the better. But I think it is reinforcing that thing that the movies got away from, right? We talked about this in our preview episodes about how the two movies that Andy Muschietti made very much leaned into the clown, mostly because of how good Bill Skarsgård was as the clown, right? He's very compelling. So every time Pennywise shows up to scare the kids, he ends up in clown form. So I kind of like, and it almost feels like a more faithful adaptation, even though I haven't read the books, having discussed them at length with you, it feels more faithful that this show is leaning further into it manifesting as specific fears for everyone, not just kids, right? Although, as is notable, doesn't manifest as anything for Major Hanlon. That's right. It's going to be, I mean, maybe this is what I want of all television shows that are being developed, is like at some point when you're being developed, what if what you thought was your greatest asset was something that you didn't have access to? And like you're saying, Bill Skarsgård. And so they had developed a whole show around the idea of not showing the clown. And then he comes back and it's like, oh, we can build the clown. My hope is that just pluses a series that was already holding together as this Fear series. And at least for these first 4 episodes, that's how it feels. Because now, as a non-book reading viewer, I have a much better sense of what this thing's power is, right? Over the people of Derry. And as someone who's also watched the movies, it is, to me, feels like it's really building toward answering the big question, which is,
at what point did it decide to become the clown and why?
Right.
You know, and I think that if that's where the show is going, whether it's going to answer that here in season 1 or whether it's going to take multiple seasons, that is a good reason to do this show, right? You know, that's a good reason to do a prequel. You always, you know, especially when you're adapting existing IP and you're kind of going off book a little bit, and you have to have a big reason why that you're making this show, other than it can't just be to bring back Bill Skarsgård. And I think that so far the show has proven that it has a reason to exist beyond Pennywise.
Well, and maybe we'll talk about ways that it can exist in Pennywise in future seasons that take place in the past in the storm. But that's also interesting to me in terms of this arc, where it's like, if they want to have future seasons go back, do you play to the Skarsgård's strength? Or do you let him play around and show up as different entities?
Sure.
And just sort of let Pennywise be the cherry on top when everybody could like peer into the future. I mean, I guess we're going to figure out this season at least what time period original Bob Gray is in.
Yeah. Or, you know, do you, in future seasons, if you go back and he's not the clown, do you have him manifest as other things, but you get Bill Skarsgård in the ADR booth to do the voice, you know?
Yeah. Or I mean, or do you have to have him be the clown? Is HBO, who we just said might have an idea that they have a hit on their hands, are they going to be like, the hit was the clown? I don't know. We'll have to see. But I definitely like where we're headed in this direction with stuff so far, the origins. So to go back to that, Demon Baby stabs Sesqui in the chest, dies. The daughter, Nakani, is eventually successful in leading a group of, it looks like again, children into the cave in the Western Wood to get more dragon glass shards. And this time, instead of building weapons, they bury the 13 pieces, light fires, which create pillars. And this is a cage that apparently keeps it within the boundaries of the thing. I would assume. So here's the assumptions I'm making. That this cage still exists and the boundaries are the same. Mm-hmm. Like you were saying, if there had been a wide shot that, sped up the development of Derry in the Western Woods, so we could see they basically caged it in Derry, and it created this sort of like farm feeding place where it could feed on white people. I think that's really interesting. However, that's not in there necessarily. Like, this boundary could have expanded. We know that once it started feeding on settlers, it got too powerful to be contained by the initial first dagger. So can it get too powerful to be contained by 13 pieces? Mm-hmm. And we know from watching It Chapter 2 that at some point they try, the Shakapiwa people, whether this be the same tribe or not, try to actually defeat it with the Ritual of Chud, and it does not go well for them.
Yeah.
So is that this, or is this that a completely separate ritual that we're going to have to deal with later when it violates this boundary in some sort of way?
Yeah, I think my assumption is that the Ritual of Chud is something that they have to do later, after maybe this cage is broken. Right, because if the pillars are underneath the sewers, that means that the development of Derry, right, the physical building of the city, could have disrupted some of these 13 pillars. 13's a lot, especially if we have to find them one by one. Hopefully, they're all close to each other. And
we don't have enough time to find them one by one, honestly.
As someone who plays a lot of video games, that is too many side quests for one season of television. So who knows? Maybe over the course of 3 seasons, we'll find all 13. Maybe they will be irrelevant by then. Who knows? But if they're underneath the sewers, how do you make sewers? You got to dig. So maybe in the process of making Derry, they eventually broke apart these pieces, and maybe that has something to do with what has created this 27-year cycle and what has created these incidents that we're seeing in Derry, these big incidents, right? The Ironworks fire and the shootout, the gang shootout, and eventually what we're going to probably see with the black spot and whatnot. And then what happens in 89. So it will be interesting to see. And it'll be kind of funny to me if all of that is answered in next week's episode. And we move on from the pillars very quickly.
Like that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. I do think that there's more to this story, and it's very telling, I think, that we see it as a legend told in a memory, told in a non-consensual shining hacking of somebody's brain. So if any of these things are like left out or selective shares, I think they could retcon it if they want. But
it's also being presented as folklore, right? That has been passed from generation to generation. So even though Rose is presenting it to Taniel as a true legend, it's still a legend that is a story that, a game of telephone through the generations. So it's an approximation at best of what really happened.
It'll be fun to see because now all we know is that the cycles begin in 1908. That's all we know in terms of cyclical things, which gives a little bit more air to a conversation we had we had in the column last week about whether or not to use the term awakening because the Easter Ironworks fire happens in 1908. Maybe the cycles weren't even a thing then. Maybe that's a bit of lore that gets added in to just the 20th century for it was the cycles, but pre-20th century, it was just around butting up against the cage, the bars of this cage, which I like. There's some things in the book about how it is able to extend its power outside of Derry because the deadlights are ultimately sourced. The deadlights being its pure form are ultimately sourced in a different dimension. So it's like the deadlights are a projection of Derry that are here, but it also has some powers outside of it. I don't think this stops that, especially since we don't know if this cage is still working. And especially since now that we've time shifted it, none of these rules necessarily apply to our group of losers who their tale seems to exist by a different set of rules, at least until the Ritual of Chud shows up on this show. Neil, usually on this show, we have corners as a way of discussing episodes. You suggested we bring that back, and I love this idea instead of just slogging through some of the losers that we don't get to see. So let's introduce these and talk about the rest of episode 4, starting with the most 1960s thing, or the historical context corner. They're dropping the Easter eggs that this takes place in 1962 all over the place. Neil, what did you catch this week?
Well, I've been obsessed with many of the references, but also a lot of the language. They use the phrase boss to mean cool. They had a very wide array of different ways to say cool in the 1960s. Things like boss or fab or ace or groovy or neato or out of sight. That's one of my favorites. So I'm curious to see if they start getting into those. So far, it's all been sort of square language, right? We haven't seen any of the 1960s like hippie influence in the culture, right? Like I feel like this is the Jackie O 1960s, and a lot of that's seen in both the fashion and the language. But I think that's because it's the early 60s. If this were set in the late 60s, I think we'd be getting a little bit more of the Jimi Hendrix headband era, and some of the let your freak flag fly slang of the late 60s, which I thought was cool. Pennywise
very specifically engineered his cycles to not have to deal with hippies.
Yeah, exactly. But I also noticed stuff like when Dick Halloran mentions, he's like, I haven't slept this well since I walked out of the cat house. Cat house is not something people use to describe brothels anymore.
It's true.
But that is something that you would have said if you were a military person who, I guess, served in either Vietnam or Korea, mostly Korea. Korea at this point, Vietnam was later. The use of the word hi-fi to indicate that they were going to put a stereo into their new rec center is pretty great. So I found that really fascinating. The reference to King Tut's tomb, even though this is something that happened in the 1920s and 30s, was very culturally relevant in the 1960s. Still, people were very obsessed with Tutankhamun and the mysteries of what was in his tomb. And
it was like a big touring exhibit of the time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, the mysteries of King Tut's tomb.
Yep. So that's a fun little reference. Obviously the nuclear age of it all, duck and cover.
Yeah.
Which
gets
me every time.
I want to stop here at duck and cover because
Sure.
I love duck and cover / Bert the Turtle. I am wondering if we're getting jerked around by some of this turtle stuff on this show.
Maybe.
In the book, Martin the Turtle, creator of the universe, positive force opposing it. And so we keep getting these appearances of turtles and things in both the It movies, and now here we keep coming back not only to Bert, but when they're burying one of the dragon glass shards, they put it in between two turtle shells. And I'm just like, man, are we gonna get there? I'm gonna be really sad if we don't get there. They're really teasing me with the turtle.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they do the turtle. Well, what's interesting to me about it is that they're doing a lot of pairing the turtle imagery with the duck and cover and sort of the nuclear paranoia of the time, which is interesting because in the context of the story world, the turtle is a very real protector of good.
Yes.
But the duck and cover strategy of the 1960s Cold War era is a very real, very ineffective protector of children, right? Like you see it in the scene where the kids are learning about the nuclear bomb, where it's like describing it as being just slightly worse than a really bad sunburn. That is not what happens when a nuclear bomb goes off. And I think that's the irony of it all, is that if a nuclear bomb went off close enough to blow down buildings in Derry, you would not get a very bad sunburn, nor would ducking and covering under your desk help you at all. You would be incinerated. And I think that's sort of one of the interesting things about this era, especially of American culture, is that they kind of led people to believe that they could be safe if a nuclear bomb went off, where that was never true, still is not true, will never be true. And it's all just sort of a farce to, I guess, make people not panic.
It's equal of a farce as the adults of Derry continuing on like they do when every 27 years a bunch of kids get murdered.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's like, it's probably not going to happen again, and we just did our best by calling a curfew. That's their only solution when kids start disappearing.
Yeah.
They're like, now there's a curfew.
So it's like this propagandizing that they're doing to the children, which acts in many ways like taking Valium, which is my other most 1960s thing that led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole, which is Mother's Little Helper, which I recognized immediately from being the subject of a Rolling Stones song from the era, and being part of what was sort of a quiet epidemic of the time, especially for suburban women in America, being prescribed Valium in large quantities and using that to sort of numb themselves to the horrors of the time. And interestingly enough, though, in my research into what Mother's Little Helper was like back then, it was apparently a little yellow pill, not a little white pill, but we can forgive the show for that slight inaccuracy.
Oh, yeah.
But it is definitely a reference to Valium, which still exists today. Benzodiazepines are very much used in treatment of anxiety and insomnia and seizures, and specifically in my case, muscle spasms. I've taken some benzos for that.
I like this addition because it feels very kid solution and also like something that you would try to go against a fear monster. It's like the Nightmare on Elm Street series eventually comes up with a drug that stops people from dreaming because they're like, in a world where there's Freddy Kruegers, why wouldn't we come up with this drug?
Sure.
And so I like the attempt of the kids to be like, how do we stop ourselves from feeling fear? I think it's a little weird that Will has the knowledge about fear making meat taste better, but doesn't share the fact that his dad might be the only person on the planet that can't feel fear. Does Will know about his dad's condition?
That is interesting. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, so we're getting to the specifics of fear and if we could tamp it down. And it would be interesting, I think, to see what happens if Mother's Little Helper ends up helping the kids. This week, it is a very excellent red herring, but Lily unfortunately drops it immediately in the toilet.
Sure.
So we haven't gotten to see if taking a Mother's Little Helper actually helps.
Yeah. Well,
stop the visions.
And then her absolutely accurate kid solution is to reach into the toilet and get it.
Yes.
Which is funny. I would have just let it go if it's me.
With Lily and, ending where she does, looking like she's attacked Marge. If Mother's Little Helper helps, could Lily get sent back to Juniper Hill and not get lobotomized, but get a prescription that makes her stronger? If you put Lily on lithium, can you not scare Lily?
That might be helpful. Then again, as we discuss a little bit in the storm, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about in the storm this week, who knows what forces are at work at Juniper Hill that are either working for or against Lily specifically.
Yes, that's very true.
I do think that this situation with Marge, as much as it does present as seemingly a fear for Marge, is more about Lily and more about not only terrorizing Lily, but pushing her back to Juniper Hill. So the question I think we should be asking ourselves is, why does it want Lily at Juniper Hill?
I have a ton of questions about that and it and Lily, and we will probably talk about them in the storm. But while we're so close to Snail Eyes, let's move over to our corner, Popping the Polygon Balloon, where we will talk about some of the visual effects in this show. I think it's important that we talk about the visual effects, even though a lot of people online, I think, are levying the same criticism as levied at the two It movies, which is sometimes it just becomes a CGI goop thing.
Yeah.
I'm starting to be on the side of CGI goop thing because that's what gets us to Turtle. We can't be shit talking a tall priest with a baby Jesus Quatu if we don't want to get to giant mystic turtle. But that being said, one small correction from last week: there wasn't any volume used in the cemetery. I've since watched the behind the scenes footage of the blue screen rigs they used to do that writing. But let's talk a little bit about the effects this episode. Snail Eyes was really cool. They had some behind the scenes footage they released after the episode where it was like a makeup effect around the actress's eyes and then two poles to do tracking on what would eventually become the snail eyes. But that blending between the actual practical effect and the digital effect ultimately made, I think, the snail eyes work for me, because the eyes themselves are just so visually wild, even in real life, that I didn't buck against them as being entirely digital. That whole sequence made me feel like I think it was supposed to, which is gross eye stuff is happening, and I don't like it.
Yeah, well, and I think, first of all, fun surprise, because after watching the trailers for the season, I assumed that it was like something that one of like the patty cakes or another kid would do to Marge,
Right.
in like a very realistic way, right? Like hit her in the glasses and like smash her eye that would cause her to need an eye patch. This is a more far more fucked up, but also goofier way to do it. And I think that's fun. And I do think that there is a method to this that is working for me, in the sense that a lot of it looks silly, but it looks consistently silly.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, like the snail eyes look just as silly as the priest's body, you know, expanding in the flashback scene. And I think that is part of them just, again, embracing that not only are some of these monsters just way over the top, but it's all happening inside of these people's minds. So, you know, your mind isn't going to be anatomically accurate when it's creating horrors. So it's more about making it look terrifying. And this definitely lives up to that. Not only the way it looks when we're seeing Marge's face, but also the POV shots from like what it looks like when she's like looking out. That I think is some of the scarier stuff. And then, you know, when she goes for the table saw is, I don't know, man. I've always had just a really intense fear of table saws in general.
Yes.
I've never had any incident with a table saw, but that's because I've never gotten close enough to a table saw to have an incident with a table saw, because I'm mortally terrified of cutting something off of my body with one of those things.
Yeah. In our high school technical theater classes, we would have to do a lot of things with saws, but everybody that used one was exposed to some horror stories of things that happen just
the
when
first
you're not
day of
paying
shop
attention.
class in high school is like all I ever needed to never want to touch that thing.
So yeah, the fact that she goes for it, I was just shocked how quickly she's like, oh my God, my eyes, I need to cut them out. I was just like, I don't know. I mean, like that communicated a lot about the experience that she was having. It reminded me of like the good parts of Goosebumps, which maybe this is just the era that we grew up, but it's a very Goosebumps idea that you're going to turn into a snail. The elevation of it to an HBO idea is no, not if I cut my eyes out first. And I think that allowed the scene to be an escalation from like, oh, this is kind of weird and creepy, through the POV shots where I'm like, now this is terrifying, to like, oh my God, please don't turn on the bandsaw.
Yeah. To the ultimate realization that she very much stabbed herself in the eye.
Yes.
In real life. And that in itself is pretty horrifying.
I hope it could heal, but maybe she's just not gonna have one eye now.
Very, very gross, scary sequence. But I would argue, Dave, not the most frightening sequence in the episode.
Oh.
I was taken aback with how good of a jump scare the Will in the river thing was.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, you kind of see it coming, right? When the fish swims up, and it's like, fish don't do that. Fish don't swim up to people fly fishing in the river and look at them inquisitively. So you knew something was going to pop out of the water, but I think it manifesting as that very specific terror of like his father burned up, the extra layer of it saying you'll burn too, with us knowing what eventually happens to Will Hanlon, you know, as an adult, is pretty gnarly. And I thought that was really well executed. And it's funny because that's such a more simple and brief sequence, right? It's far shorter than the snail eyes sequence. It's maybe the shortest of all of the scare sequences that we've seen in the season so far, but it's incredibly effective. I also think mostly because this kid that's playing Will is really good.
Yeah, he's doing a great job.
What's his name? What's this kid's name? This actor, Blake Cameron James. Cameron
James,
crushing it, especially in this episode. Like there are several times, you know, like when he's in his room after seeing the clown outside his window and he's like in the corner shaking, the conversation he's having with his mother, when he tells his dad that there's something in Derry. we praised earlier in the season Clara Stack, who plays Lily, for her ability to just scream on screen really well. That's impressive. But this, I think, is another really good instance of casting where his ability to seem rattled is really good. And this is something that is underrated, I guess, in a show like this, which is how difficult it is to cast and direct and have child actors who are this good, right? These aren't like little kids. These are teenagers acting.
Right.
So they're better than you would get.
Who have aged like half a year since episode 3 because of strikes.
Yeah. But, kid actors generally are not always great.
Correct.
So the fact that this show was able to not only cast, but is getting really good performances out of these kids is something that is worthy of praise, I think.
I also really like the sequence. I like that Will is science-minded enough that he's like, he's like, not only is it feeding on fear, but how did it know that was my fear?
Yeah.
So he's sort of tapped into the fact that it's like a little bit psychic. I will say that in the making of, they're like, that fish we had a robotic fish that could swim around, we could pull it around and like shoot it. I went back and watched that several times. I think that is a complete digital replacement of a very nicely referenced robotic fish. But you tell me, people who replicate things underneath the water surface, sure. I would just replace the entire surface of the water if I was doing that shot.
Yeah, I mean, it's an easy thing to hide, though, because it's underwater. Yeah. So it's obscure. It's like doing a digital monster that's in like a fog. It's easier because you can hide the seams, essentially. So I also assume that it was a digital fish. So if that's a real practical effect, that is kind of impressive. But they might also be lying. Or
it had me expecting, I was like, are they going to do the creature from the Black Lagoon, which does appear in the book? I'm like, oh, we're going to get a creature shout out. But you're right, making it You'll Burn 2 while he's actually floating, like, nice irony, chef's kiss right there. Yeah. But also the fact that you brought up that we know that's how he eventually dies is terrifying.
Yep. It's pretty terrifying.
For Will.
And then the other thing I wanted to track in our Polygon Corner is I'm fascinated with how they're achieving some of the shining effects. And obviously there are some big swings that they take in the scene where Halloran is interrogating Taniel and going into his mind. But I have also sort of noticed the way that the camera perspective changes a little bit, especially in the scene where he sees his grandmother in the woods outside of the black spot, where it gets a little bit more of like a fisheye effect. And we get like this intense volumetric lighting situation where we can kind of see the light pouring through. And I think that's kind of fascinating. I'm constantly fascinated in visual stories that are trying to show us what it would be like if you had psychic abilities, right? What that experience would look like. And so far, they've done a pretty good job of showing us how Dick Halloran's, like, the world around him changes as he's shining, and how that is unnerving and terrifying, and why, if you were Dick Halloran, you would not be enjoying this situation, right? Because I think that's kind of the point of The Shining, right? It's like you have this ability, but it's not fun.
Yeah,
there's nothing cool about it, right? You're not like a superhero mind reader. It's more of like a burden than anything else.
Yeah.
So I think that is really important for the show to effectively deliver the experience of, because, when we meet Dick Halloran later in life, he's not really super happy about the whole thing.
Well, it's a good place also to pivot to the Kingverse Easter egg of the week. calling out some wider Easter egg things. When Dick sees his grandmother, he sees flashes of a bunch of things, which I think because of his proximity to the black spot, some of those are black spot. One of them looks to be like Dick's father, who was abusive, maybe attacking his grandmother. So we see sort of like some past things. But she says, keep the lid on, which outside of the King verse could just be like, he needs to keep this situation under control. He needs to keep something secret, etc. But in the context of the King verse, we talked about how in Dr. Sleep, Dick Halloran's grandmother taught him this very special property where you take something that's scary to you that The Shining makes you see. For Danny Torrance, it's ghosts. We don't know exactly what it is for Dick Halloran. Well, we do know one of them, but I doubt we're going to see on the show, which was his abusive grandfather, I believe. But you take it and you put it in like a psychic box and you put it in a lock box. And as long as you keep it in there, it can't haunt you anymore. So it is possible that keep the lid on is referencing to the fact that Dick has already put his greatest fear in a box. And so far, it has not been able to open that box. But if it opens that box, then Dick's probably going to have a real bad time.
Sure.
Even with his Shining.
Yeah. So, we worry about Dick getting too close to the deadlights, I think.
We do.
For sure.
There's one sort of greater thing that happens this episode that we haven't talked about that I do want to talk about before we move on to some speculation in the storm, which is the Hanlon family. I'm very impressed, but that also in this story world makes me very scared that both of these adults within their capacity immediately believe their child.
Yeah.
It probably helps that Will is probably the most skeptical of all of them. So he has the language to talk about it. It probably also helps that Charlotte's background means she's going to be, she's going to see that Will trying to help Ronnie is something akin to, what her activism can do and bring her into that story with Hank. So I think that's really cool. And as soon as Leroy sees what it does to Will in the river, rather than trying to write it off, he begins his journey of confrontations that eventually leads him to the actual answer.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty amazing single episode arc in a story world where parents suck across the board up till now.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because this story has positioned this family in many ways, obviously, especially because it's set in the 1960s and we know about the racial politics of the era, and position them as sort of outsiders living inside the city, right? They will always be looked upon as being different because Derry is seemingly a very, very white city to live in. So there's that. And then they've also positioned Leroy Hanlon as being very close to the only other entity of any authority that believes in the supernatural of it all, which is the military, and only secretly, right? Like we see in the first scene how easily the police are manipulated away from this idea, right? Like they don't see they see the pictures differently and they don't buy it at all. But, I think it's interesting that Leroy was very primed to be able to believe his son. And it didn't take very much for him to sort of become the first person to be like, hey, there actually is something weird going on here. Especially because what are all these red balloons that keep showing up around me?
Right.
So I think that's really interesting to position them. And I also sort of see that as being a point of tension that can have multiple layers in this story as we sort of build towards some kind of climax, right? Like there is going to be a conflict between the white population of Derry and the black populations of Derry, both the military side and the civilian side. And those are going to be along socio-political lines, right? The misexecution of justice in the case of Hank Grogan, right? And Charlotte and her many wonderful hats, her many wonderful Jackie O hats, fighting for him in a very like real world situation, just trying to fight against him being forced into his wrongful confession, which is a very, very prominent thing that happened during the civil rights era. And then I also think this goes back to my theory about what's about to happen on Neibolt Street, which is if the military sends a bunch of soldiers after Pennywise, and it is primarily a bunch of white soldiers, and those guys don't come out of the sewer, that is going to create a significant tension if the guys who are chilling at the black spot miss the party. Right?
All right.
Like what happens if Dick Halloran is like, hey guys, sit this one out. Don't come with this operation. And those guys all don't get murdered by a clown in the sewers and a bunch of white soldiers die. You can see that becoming a point of contention then within just the military base, where the remaining white soldiers are like, what's going on here? Right? What is the deal with Halloran? How is he able to sort of protect his friends? And, why did all these other guys have to die? Because again, my theory is that like a lot of military guys are not going to make it out of next week's episode if they're going into the sewer like we saw in the trailer. So I think that, and that, that creates a situation on this show where it's telling this story that is obviously about who believes that there is a supernatural entity here terrorizing people, right? Who believes and who doesn't believe, and the tension between those two things. And then the racial tension of the time, Right. So I think that is what the show is aiming for. And so far it's been really interesting. It's a very woke show, and I say that in a complimentary way.
I like that they use Charlotte to talk to Hank, and I also like that we learned that there's more to Hank's story than we thought, so he couldn't just prove himself innocent. So there is absolutely overt racism framing of a black man going on, miscarriage of justice, but there's also this other wrinkle that he was with a married white woman, so we can't actually free him with the truth. There has to be another around, otherwise the racism is going to win out over the justice. I'm wondering if we're going to figure out that married wife woman is also it. I'm wondering if it flames the racial thing as well.
And you would think, especially if the power of it is to feed off of fear, right? What is the sort of central driving force of racial tension in America in the 1960s, other than one side fearing the other, right?
Well, also Hank being like, it just happened, like a married white woman just happened, could be, an expression of that particular woman's character, if we ever figure out who that woman is, or something that needed to happen. Something that I was reminded of by people talking about the previous episodes was in It Chapter 1, it breaks up the kids in Neibolt Street, and they all see like visions of, things that terrify them, while actual corporeal Pennywise is crawling after Eddie. So it can be multiple places at once. It is not confined to be one entity at one time.
Yeah.
So it's very possible that it is a married white woman while it is a mutant baby at the theater at the exact same time, to sort of self-create an alibi for itself.
Yeah, and of course it would exploit the sort of the biggest cultural issues of the time that would generate fear in this town.
going to probably get worse before it gets better for the residents of Derry.
Yeah, and I would imagine that what we're going to see, or maybe what will define some of these cycles, is what are the larger fears that it can exploit in this town that will cause explosions of violence. And in the 1960s, it's racism. You know, in 1930, it might be something slightly different. In 1908, it might be something slightly different. I mean, it might also just be racism because it's America. But in 1962, it's definitely racism.
I think in the 1930s, I think it's gangsters, which I'm on board
also
for.
Makes sense.
Like, let's go. All right, Neil. I think there's definitely other stuff to talk about, but it is going to involve that that end of season teaser. So is there anything we need to touch on before we transition into the storm?
I think we've kind of hit it all. There's definitely more to do in the storm, though, for sure.
All right. Well, then let's head into that storm.
Well, you got trouble, my friend. Right here, I say trouble right here.
What are you doing in the sewer?
The storm blew me away. Blew the whole circus away.
So much to talk about even before we get into the trailer. So some previous making of material last week had the actress who played Rose mention that she was part of the Children of Maturin. And I'm like, I'm going to let that slide. But then they did it again on this week's making of. So that's why I stopped referring to them as the Shakapiwa, because I think we might be dealing with an entire other group, the Children of Maturin, which are the indigenous people whose job it is to protect from it. It makes sense because, like, it's the Shakapiwa are very smart and are staying out of the boundary of it. And
they might even be the cousins who moved to Nova Scotia, for all we know.
Yes. The Children of Maturin are definitely staying around and maybe battling it. We don't know. It does seem weird that Rose says nothing to Mrs. Hanlon about what's actually going on. Do you think that the Children of Maturin, like, do you think that the cycle is some sort of deal?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be one of two things, right? It has to be either a deal that was struck with the entity or some sort of incident that happened that sort of broke the entity. Right? Like a skipping record almost. You know, like like the record was playing just fine in the Western woods for hundreds of years, just sort of on its own. But then somebody broke the needle and now it's skipping every 27 years sort of deal. So I don't, the question is, can this entity be negotiated with? Which we have not seen any evidence of that yet, right? Like, you can't bargain with Pennywise. You can only defeat him by not fearing him.
We have seen some slight evidence that Pennywise would be up to a bargain, because at the end of chapter 1, he's like, if you let me take Bill, I'll just go to sleep.
Okay. So maybe there is a bargain to be had.
Well, and then the end of the final trailer we have is Pennywise like reaching his hand out and somebody taking it. So I don't want to be out. I don't want to discount Pennywise can make deals.
Yeah. So I'm curious to see
just
where
wants
it
to
lands.
eat well.
It is either that they broke it in some way, or that they brokered something with the entity. And I think either solution is fascinating.
I think it's interesting that, as far as we know, the Children of Maturin are actually in Derry, in the physical spot of Derry, but they don't seem to be victims. Like, we don't have indigenous victims that we know of.
Sure.
So that maybe that's the deal. It's like, you could take the settlers, they don't know any better, but, otherwise keep to the boundary.
But fuck them. They brought us diseased blankets.
Yeah.
Which, fair. The other question I guess is, like, if, again, this is like a geographical logistics question, which is like, can they live in Derry, but not within the boundary of these pillars? Because, like, that would allow the Children of Maturin to, like, live close to it, but not necessarily live completely under its influence, right? Like they just don't go on Neibold Street type of deal. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. But as we've discussed, it does seem like once these cycles start, it has the ability to influence outside of its cage, essentially. So, how that came to be and what are the sort of rules of that is something I think the show seems interested in and might want to answer for us, hopefully. I don't know. Or will be a question we'll be left with unanswered. Who knows?
Here's the biggest Citadel of Crazy Town theory that I've seen developing over these 4 episodes. So we talked about last week that whatever we were calling her, Ingrid, the brunette woman who shows up this week in the cafeteria and does not have a reflection in a episode where they talk about Dracula not casting a reflection.
Right.
Could be Mrs. Kirsch. And we talked about how that could be possible because of, her like reincarnating. Because there's a shot in this season on trailer of a woman hanging in Juniper Hill who's a brunette. But as people have pointed out to me since then, that actress is in her 60s. So she could just be not having died that child in 1908, that child clown. That could still be the person without having died, who would be Mrs. Kirsch because she married the butcher, Kirsch the Cleaver, who we've already met. So she might not be as dead as I thought she was, which leads me to the second part of this theory, which is the reason the police officers can see the clown and the reason that the silhouette of the clown that we see both in the cemetery and this week outside of Will's window is different from Pennywise is because that's not Pennywise. That is Miss Kirsch being the clown.
Interesting.
And so Pennywise is the clown and likes being the clown because it uses the form of her father to control Mrs. Kirsch. And when we're told in this season on trailer, we hear Pennywise being like, "You brought them all to me," or whatnot. He's not talking to Lily. He's not talking to Dick. He's talking to like his little murder disciple. And the reason he likes being the clown so much is because being the clown allows him to be the father figure to this little murder disciple.
Okay.
Miss Kirsch, who is a white married woman.
Ooh, okay. All right. And this is interesting because this goes along with my other Citadel of Crazy Town theory or observation of the week, which is we had talked about this Ingrid woman's relationship with Lily and whether or not we would ever see any other adult or any other character talk to her. Right?
Yeah.
We see them in the diner this week together, which in theory means that all those other people in the diner would have seen her, but we don't see anybody interact with her. The other thing that I noticed about this scene is that they are sitting in a booth that is flanked by a wall with a big mirror on it. But the way this scene is shot seems very intentional in that the angles that they get show us Lily's reflection in the mirror, but never show us any sort of confirmation of reflection or no reflection of Ingrid. Like we never get the other angle where it would show us Ingrid's reflection in the mirror. So I feel like there is a possibility that this could be either a scene we return to where we see it from another angle and there's only one reflection in the mirror type of deal. Because like that was something that immediately popped up in my head as I was watching the scene. I'm like, that's curious because they keep cutting to this angle where I can see Lily's reflection, but they never show me the other side.
Yeah.
So it further leads me to believe that she's not there. And
that's what
it also would stand to reason
that
it also stands to reason that like the other people in the diner wouldn't be paying attention necessarily to Lily just sitting there by herself, even if she's sitting there talking to herself.
Yeah, she's the crazy girl. Her dad turned into a pickle.
Yeah, so like that wouldn't be entirely weird for the other denizens of Derry. So I think that to me feels very specific in the way that the show presented that sequence. And there's just also something kind of weird and unnerving about how encouraging she is with like, oh, just stick with your friends and keep on your path and keep
She's
going.
always quoting her father. And she's never said anything about her father.
Yeah. So, whether she's Mrs. Kirsch or not, I think she's definitely tied to the clown.
Well, we see at the beginning of the mid-season trailer, the shots that we've seen some parts of before of Lily in like the attic area of the house looking at a photo book that has pictures of Bob Gray and his daughter. But this trailer adds a shot of the clown child's wig on a like dresser head. So if this is all the same place, I believe this will be the reveal scene.
Sure.
That who we've been dealing with has been Bob Gray's
and it would make sense that
daughter.
If this is a room in Juniper Hill that Lily finds after she's sent back there after the events of this week.
That's true. I think it might also just be the Kirsch house.
Okay.
Because we do see her riding her bike and screaming. And from the previously on trailer, there was that one shot of her going up to a house and she turns her head and there's a guy like smiling at her while he's watering the lawn. Whether or not she has to go through Juniper Hill before we get that scene, I think would be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's safe to say she's headed back to Juniper Hill after this week.
I would also assume such a thing.
Yeah. She was set up, but set up pretty well.
Yeah. And then we have one more theory that I wanted to talk about before we jump into the full trailer, which is the Marge is Rich's father theory. So the way this fan theory goes is Marge is going to end up being, sorry, not Rich's father. Richie's father.
Yeah, Bill Hader.
Is Rich. Yes. Because she will eventually become Rich's father, Margaret, who we read about in the book. But she will
Rich's
have
mother.
named Rich's mother. she will have named Richie after Rich because Rich is going to make the lover's sacrifice for her in this season.
Okay.
So our little Cuban boy Rich is Richie Tozier Trashmouth's namesake because Marge is Rich's father. The one thing that this might be is we've seen a lot of teasers of this sort of mist sequence that looks like, if I were to guess, the climax of the series, if not the final episodes, which is like there's kids floating in the mist and it's all the girls who are dealing with it. It's Ronnie, Marge, and Lily who are dealing with it. I don't see any Will, but we know Will survives because Will has to eventually have Mike. We don't see any Rich here. At some point, Rich is not in some of these action sequences.
Yeah.
So I fear for poor Rich.
Yeah, it's tough, but it also explains why the show has gone to pretty good lengths this far to make Rich extremely likable.
Yeah.
Only to snatch him away.
They're probably going to be like something grabs Rich and pulls him into the darkness, and Marge tries to, grab him and grabs his shoe, and the shoe comes off and the poem's in there, and Rich is dead. And lo and behold, that's the end of Rich.
Yep.
That's just a guess, though.
That's a good theory.
It looks interesting. All right. So other things that we see in the mid-season trailer breakdown. Hank gets transferred to Shawshank, which he was warned he might have to do for a few days this episode. And it looks like Charlotte's there, and based on a buck-toothed smiling police officer, it appears like it is there. But also a father takes a shot at Hank with a gun. It looked like it could have been Phil's father. The only reason I was trying to guess is, do you think this is a father of one of the kids that Hank is accused of killing? Or do you think this is the husband of the white woman and cat's out of the fucking bag?
Ooh, I mean, or it could just be a random racist townie.
Could just be a random
mad
racist
about
townie.
The kids. I think that's also possible. I don't, especially given, Hank's fear about it. I don't think it's going to be like the husband, unless it's a vision. Like, what if it's Pennywise manifesting the husband? Because, if the smiling policeman's there, then Pennywise is there. So
It's true.
That's interesting to me. But again, it could just be just random dude who's mad. I mean, there's plenty of racists in this town who are going to want to.
Yeah, that stuff happens even without it in real life. Yeah, I'm sure that also a possibility.
My question is, do we make it to Shawshank? Are we going to see Shawshank?
Nah, I think
so?
that's too much.
I mean, and it
Red's in Shawshank right now, canonically. So like the Shawshank Redemption is happening over there.
Yeah. And I also, to me, it's a pet project thing for me because Shawshank Redemption, the movie, was filmed at the Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio, which I used to live like down the street from for several years of my life. I lived in Mansfield, Ohio, the meth capital of Ohio. I never did meth, but that's what it's known for. But so like them recreating Shawshank would be fascinating. I would be doing some architectural deep dives into comparing it with the original buildings. But
if I learned anything from the Hulu series Castle Rock, Shawshank is ultimately not what you want it to be. So
yeah, that's true.
I would say we don't need to go there, but
do you think
we'll
do you think he even makes it to Shawshank? Like, or does this incident keep him in Derry?
I think this incident keeps him in Derry.
And is this incident manufactured by the clown to keep him in Derry?
Well, we have, so interesting thing. I couldn't find an episode description for episode 5, which is called Neibold Street, which is next week's episode.
Mm-hmm.
But we did have episode 6's description we got last week, which includes Dick learns the black spot is integral to Charlotte's plan. So I don't know how Charlotte's plan with Hank gets involved in the black spot, but I think they keep Hank here, and the boiling over of the Hank incident is what's going to cause the black spot where the white decency league rolls in and lights it all on fire.
Yeah.
Like I think Dick's there. I think Hank's there
mm-hmm.
because in this mid-season trailer, we see a bunch of fire, which we assume is the black spot. We see the black spot on fire in like a wide shot. But then we see that thing I was talking about with Pennywise reaching his hand out. And we also see a shot of Dick and Ronnie in that fire background.
Sure.
Ronnie has no reason to be there unless Hank's there. So
Yeah.
I think Hank ends up in the black spot.
Well, and you almost see, I could see a scenario where whatever this incident on the way to the bus is so chaotic that Hank actually gets away.
Oh, okay.
And then they hide him at the black spot because they do mention as they're cleaning out this building how remote it is to the base.
That's true.
And how nobody goes out there and it's been decommissioned. So like if you're going to hide a fugitive, that's actually not a terrible place to hide them, right? Because, especially if the military thinks that that's just the place where the black airmen are going to chill, they're not going to necessarily go out there. They're going to leave them alone. That's kind of the point. That's Dick Halloran has negotiated that peace at this point. And then the rest of the town probably doesn't even know that it exists because it's like adjacent to the base.
Yeah.
So that would be where I would hide Hank if I were hiding a fugitive.
So other things in the mid-season trailer that have to do with Dick specifically. Dick says in the line of dialogue that it forced itself inside of his head. We see a flash of Dick being surrounded by sort of like, it looks like charred bodies, but it could be from his war experience as well,
Mhm.
but sort of being haunted. We see Dick talking to somebody while he's aiming a gun at them, and he has a bottle of booze next to him. From The Shining, booze is one of the ways to sort of dull The Shining. Like you can't really turn it off, but you could sort of dull it.
Mm-hmm.
And alcohol helps with that. But the part that I was so happy I frame by frame through, we have a shot of Dick looking wild with some volumetric lighting, and there's some flashing light, and one of those flashes lights up Dick, and he's in black and white. So I think this is the black and white flashback that we've been teased
Okay.
with black and white Pennywise. So I think at least that seems to be when Dick's going to come face to face with the clown
Sure.
version of Pennywise.
And that
which could be happening sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that to me, at least in this mid-season trailer, feels like the only stuff that comes from this next episode, right? Because curiously missing from this mid-season trailer is any footage of soldiers on Neibolt Street or going into the sewer.
They're not going into the sewer. There's 2 shots of soldiers going into Neibolt Street. There's one from inside where we see 2 soldiers coming in. But then there's the reverse shot where behind those 2 soldiers are Dick and Daniel.
Okay.
So that could be maybe directly next week. But we don't get the shot of the well that we've seen in the previous teasers.
Yep.
And we don't get Uncle Sam Pennywise, which we've got in the previous teasers. So we know that at least the military gets down into the well, which could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
week.
And again, I think there's a very specific purpose of not showing a lot from next week's episode because, once they get down there, I think it's going to go very badly for them.
Yeah, definitely. So it looks like Dick's going to at least spend some of the season being haunted. That might be the end point for him. He might just get out of Derry having pointed to Neibolt Street. So we're going to have to see how that goes.
Yeah. Well, and again, my theory from last week is that the entire military operation could fall apart within like the next episode or 2 here.
Yeah.
And then
we see the
military, and then we'll deal with just the town after that.
We see the military loading something into a red hot tube. So I'm guessing they get at least 1 pillar at some point, or they find something. They could just go directly into Neibolt Street, get out with like just a shard, and they could just try to keep the shard rather than finding all 13 pillars.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if they figure it out. It is interesting to me that they were looking for the 13 pillars when they went into Daniel's mind, but instead Daniel sent them to the source. So I'm wondering how much of that is important or just happenstance that Dick dug too well.
Yeah.
And then we got a whole bunch of mist section stuff. There's definitely kids floating in the air. That is not underground. That is above ground, but in the mist. We see a lot of Marge getting pulled into the mist again and being stalked by Pennywise in the mist. There's a shot of Pennywise, or as I guess we've been calling in merch, Blood Pennywise, where he has blood up to the bottom of his nose, saying, I've always wondered how you taste. It looks like it is happening in the fog, so that might also be to Marge, as far as I can tell. But other than that, some repeated shots of what we've seen of the patty cakes being apparently mass deadlit in the gym after they get locked in, probably leading to the kids floating, the all float to around here. There was an interesting moment where they talked about maybe Maddie not being dead in this week's episode. That made me think about Phil. That made me think about maybe all the Deadlight kids are coming back to play. Which then made me think, is there a way for the kids to win this season still? We know they can't defeat it.
Right.
But if they're slightly tweaking the rules, is a win over the military enough in this season to sort of send Pennywise back and maybe the kids can recover the other kids?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that there is... I think some of the kids are dead. I don't think Susie's coming back. But we'll see. I do think, though, that is a central tension of the season, which is the military is, when we see this, there's a little shot of Shaw and Rose talking, and Rose is like, it can't be controlled.
Right.
And this idea that the military wants to capture the entity and then take it out of Derry and use it in the Cold War against the Russians, which we know can't happen because it's still there in 1989, but also that is sort of its own evil that needs to be defeated by the town, right? In order to keep the entity, in order to keep the Galoo inside of its cage, you got to stop the military from unleashing it, right? Because if the military digs up all these pillars, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to control the entity. That just means that it's going to be loose.
Right.
like that they don't, I mean, they should know better, but it's the American military. And, we know the metaphor here. So, it's the idea that they don't understand the power that they're messing with. And so, yeah, I think that if that's the whole sort of point of the season, or the big conflict of the season, is that the kids are able to stop the military from, with the help of like Major Hanlon, maybe he turns and takes the side of his kid over his country, even though everything else that we've seen from him tells us that he's very much a company man for the military, which is
he does
great
call
setup.
Shaw fucking insane in the teaser.
Yep, it's pretty great setup for his character to have a turn eventually. And if it's about stopping the military and putting the entity back to sleep, I think that's enough of a win to be able to say like good wins for now, even though you obviously can't defeat the entity completely because there's more story.
I think how did Mrs. Kirsch survive the 1930s cycle is an interesting thing for season 2. I think there's a lot more to be explored with the indigenous tribe, the children of Matern in season 2.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like super interested in this sort of, which I think is by necessity, by making this a prequel, this sort of backwards way of storytelling and how that influences the surprises you could post.
And it does seem like, especially the more we talk about it, that this show could be building toward a third season that answers the question of like, how did the cycle start?
Yeah. Or the thing I was thinking is like, if like the whole Mrs. Kirsch is the clown, is the agent of the clown right now, theory ends up being true, then if Mrs. Kirsch has always been seeing it as the form of her father, and maybe she's helping it because she thinks in some way she's helping her father, no one ever really dies, so she sees her father and feeds into like this clown thing, then you could get Bill Skarsgård doing Pennywise in a 1930s season because he's going to appear as the head clown of this Kirsch character.
Mm-hmm.
It's very possible that what it's doing is sort of like a Westworld, where like the first season sort of like the Man in Black exists in multiple time periods.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's hard to think about the rest of the Westworld story without knowing that first season what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really only a mystery in that first season that it was doing timey-wimey, 2 characters or 1 character stuff. This entire show might be building us to, we'll watch the whole first season with a different antagonist in mind, which is like outside of touching The Shining through Dick Halloran, everything's going exactly according to its plan right now.
Right. Well, and
it is very much in control.
And it would stand to reason, I guess, if I want to put myself in the shoes of the entity for a second and think about if it was forming if it's been around for millions of years, and then it's also been contained for hundreds of years by the indigenous people, and its goal is to break loose of its bonds, then it's probably into this plan by the military, right? Like it kind of wants the military to succeed here. It's
going to let them
releasing
get the pillars.
Yeah.
If it wants to get out.
And the kids defeating that would be ultimately defeating the entity as well. So that I think lends more credence to that theory. And yeah, so it's like, is the entire point of this show to show us how over the course of these 3 cycles, the clown or the entity executes its plan to try and free itself of its bonds and ultimately fails. And it's sort of reverse engineering how it fails. And then, obviously we know how its journey ends in the 80s and then the 2000s.
I mean, I think we could be reverse engineering a better way on how it worked in like the 80s. Like, if you could deepen my understanding of how those losers came together, like, there's always been a theory, because Stephen King's books are intertwined, that the reason the losers defeated Pennywise at all was like they all had a little bit of the shine.
Okay.
And when they were all together, they had enough shining to actually do the book ritual of Chud, which is this whole metaphysical ritual.
Sure.
And so that's like a strength that only those kids can do. It couldn't just be any group of kids that realized there was a clown in the sewer. It had to be this group. So we could be building in these seasons. We could be maybe improving that lackluster second movie by being like, it had to be these kids.
Sure.
And here are the steps why.
And the idea might be that like matter in the turtle is what gives people the shine. And that one person with the shine isn't enough, right? Like Dick Halloran can't defeat the entity on his own, which is, I think, something we'll probably learn in this season. But maybe a group of kids who all have a little bit of shine, their forces combined, Captain Planet, defeat the entity.
Right. Well, I mean, that's what Dr. Sleep also adds to the mythology, is all kids have a little bit of shine, and it's just a matter of how much shine. And that's why Rose the Hat wants to suck all their steam out, just because they're super shiny. So yeah, the idea also that way back in the original battle with the Galoo, it was a group of kids that ultimately were able to get the thing done, is possibly because the shine. So if each season is building up to why our losers in the movies were capable of defeating it, it might make me feel a little bit better about the fact that they insulted it to death.
Sure.
And then ripped out its heart.
And from a meta perspective, Dave, it is the ultimate redemption for Stephen King of The Shining as a concept. He has finally fixed his cinematic universe to be an accurate representation of The Shining and taken it away from the ghost of Stanley Kubrick, I guess.
The Shining's back in it form. Speaking of, if you guys do go check out Running Man, imagine my chortle when, after doing all these Welcome to Derry episodes, he has to go meet somebody in Derry. And I'm just like, oh, right. It exists in the Running Man universe.
Yep.
Anyway, neither here nor there.
I mean, the good news for Glenn Powell is he's already defeated by then. So,
big question, Neil. We're going to see Pennywise the Dancing Clown next week. Is it Bill Skarsgård time finally?
Well, I think, as we mentioned from the season trailer, we're going to see the Uncle Sam version, which I think is going to be, to a certain extent, Bill Skarsgård, but maybe isn't going to look like Pennywise.
Sure.
I don't know. I think I am so far really impressed with the show's restraint. The fact that we now have jumped in production time to the post-strike part of the production leads me to believe that maybe we will start to see the clown a little bit, but I am hopeful that we won't, because I think it is a more interesting show if they continue to wait. I don't think they can wait much longer, right? Like, I think they can maybe do like 2 more episodes without showing us like the version of Pennywise that people recognize. But I think that they could get away with a couple more episodes of having him continue to manifest as not specifically, because even the version that Will sees outside of his window is still sort of looks like the little girl from 1908. Right. Like, still doesn't look like the movie Pennywise. So I think we're still building toward that. And I think it's just going to be a little bit more, we have more time with the red balloon before we actually see the clown. And I think that's kind of fun, right? If we don't see Pennywise in his notable form until like the penultimate episode, that would be, in my mind, kind of a bold choice for the show. It would show a level of restraint that I did not expect, especially after seeing those 2 movies where Andy Muschietti just could not help himself from showing the damn clown. As a person who does not like seeing the clown, I noticed how much he loves showing the clown. And so, like, my assumption is, especially going into this season, knowing that Bill Skarsgård is executive producer and that by the time they finished producing this thing, he was enthusiastically all in on this. My assumption was we were going to get a lot more clown, and I'm enjoying the fact that we're not. So I kind of hope that continues for like 2 more episodes at least.
I'm going to devil's advocate and say they might do the clown for a teaser next week, because we've gotten 2 final scenes in a row that have been teasers. Like, they're like, the franchise. So they're developing a picture and the kids are like, what is it? And they're like, it's a clown. And the show's like, bum, 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 end of episode.
Mm-hmm.
But that's for us. We know that we're waiting for the clown.
Yeah.
And then this week, we see the house on Neibold Street, which doesn't mean anything to any of our characters, but we know what it means.
Yeah.
So I think there's a slight possibility that we see Pennywise next week, because I do think we're building to some sort of reveal. They would like the reveal of the second clown, whether that be the woman that Lily's talking to, or whether that just be whoever frightens Lily in that attic space with the photos of Bob Gray. I think they want to explain that first before they fully commit to the clown.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, by the time I think we get to Black Spot, I think we're in full Pennywise.
Okay.
Because we keep seeing versions of Pennywise that are not the clown, but we keep seeing products that have at least 7 versions of Pennywise. So we really need to start checking some of these versions of Pennywise off.
Well, and I mean, that's the thing is we only have the titles for episodes 5 and 6, but episode 6 being titled In the Name of the Father makes me feel like that's going to be a very Bob Gray heavy episode.
Does feel like it.
So that to me would be the moment where I would not only show Pennywise as the clown, but if you're going to do any showing of how he became the clown, that would be where I would show that flashback.
So Neibold Street, military gets screwed, Dick gets traumatized.
Yep.
In the Name of the Father, Lily learns the backstory of the clown. We get full Pennywise form.
Yep.
Black Spot.
Episode 7,
missed.
Everyone gets lit on fire.
Yeah.
Episode 8, fog.
Yep. It's going to be great. I can't wait to see if we're correct, or even what happens next week. It's very weird to not have an episode description. What are they hiding?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's going to do it this week for Storm of Spoilers. Make sure to join us next Monday, as we'll be back with episode 5, Neibold Street. Don't know what's going to happen. Guessing we're going to see an Uncle Sam version of it. Until then, go out there, be excellent to each other. Keep your eyes away from the bandsaw.